am Meredith, this is Harrison, and we are P1 Picks, a Formula One podcast that uses data and analytics to give you the betting lines on upcoming Formula One races. Now, this is the last race we have coming up. We just had an incredibly saucy, spicy Hungarian Grand Prix. We'll get into all of that in just a minute. But this is the last race we have before summer break, and I'm like a little bit sad about it. I mean, this is very much a big part of my life right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great last race out in Hungary. We had all of our favorites, a Lewis podium, a Max meltdown, team orders that worked very well. I'm talking about Aston Martin, by the way. So yeah, I think it was a great weekend. Terrible strategies. I'm looking at you, Racing Bull. So I think we learned a lot. McLaren now had the fastest car, and I think that's probably our greatest insight. Max is really struggling, even with the update. They weren't particularly third fastest. Mercedes looks like they're back, but teams are going to have to get it right. George Russell was really penalized for the track drying really quickly. So one thing that I think we want to look at and talk and maybe focus a little bit on is it looks like it's going to rain at Spa. Spa is a long lap. That potentially means that there are going to be some parts of the track that are going to be wet. There are going to be some parts of the track that are going to be dry, and that means that drivers are going to be penalized, if they're trying to be too aggressive maybe on that first out lap, on that banker lap. So especially with the rain in qualifying on a long lap at Spa, it's definitely going to lead to parts of the track being dry and parts of the track being wet. And I think that's going to lead to a really interesting wet-dry qualifying.
Yeah, for sure. And this is definitely a race that Max Verstappen has done very well in the last few years. 3 times in a row he has won this race, but granted, Max has kind of won everything up until this year, it feels like. Mm-hmm. So with that being said, though, this is the longest track on the schedule, and one of the original when in 1950 when Formula One started, this is one of the original tracks that they raced at, so a lot of history here. I think that what we have, this is the most exciting Formula One season that I've ever lived through. Now granted, I am like a Drive to Survive Formula One new kid, but like just give me context, Harrison. Like, when was the last time it felt like this to be a Formula One fan?
I mean, I think 2012 we had 8 different winners over the course of the season. So, I mean, I think 2012 when Pastor Maldonado won in Spain, I mean, I think that was kind of the season that felt similar to this, where kind of any team could win a race. Just imagine if Albon and Williams wins a race after kind of what we've seen already. So, I think this season has been great because a lot of the top teams have really showed they have form, right? Let's look at Australia. Ferrari are there. Let's look at Monaco. Ferrari are, really strong in those races. We think Ferrari is back. We go to Canada and we're surprised that Mercedes puts it on pole. So I think we've had some surprises. I think the field has been so close that any team that brings an upgrade just allows them to kind of move up potentially 3 or 4 positions after that next race. Or, if you bring an upgrade that doesn't work, Aston Martin, Red Bull, you're also able to potentially slide back down the field. So I think this is one of the seasons where the upgrades that teams are bringing, especially kind of as the development course kind of runs its path, is really, really important to see how that plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the concept of team is really important to talk about here too. My heart almost broke for Sergio in qualifying on Saturday because, I mean, this is really... What do you think is going to happen? Like, if you had to bet on it?
He had a good race. Finished P7. I think Red Bull are going to keep him because Danny Rick is not any better. Danny Rick's not any better. Yuki has his ups and his downs. Liam seems fantastic, but are you going to put Liam in Red Bull with no practice? Probably not. I mean, realistically, I don't think they can lose any of their drivers because I think the pressure... It is really looking realistically that Max goes to Mercedes. Everyone has called this crazy, but I think the more that you start to see the friction between the team, no more sim racing, asking that he's put on this wrong strategy. I mean, just when you decipher the radio calls, there seems to be a gap between Max and the team, and he has a comment in kind of the post-race, which, he's calmed down, he's cool, and he goes, not everybody on this team is understanding how close this is, right? Not every people need to get with the picture. And I just think that quote really says that Max is he's trying to push the team forward, and if he's not winning, he's not happy, and he's going to go somewhere else. So I think he loses at Spa. He has a long summer break to think about it. Max might be adios.
I know. Like, we could start 2025 next season with 2 new Red Bull drivers. And, like, can you imagine saying that last year? I think that, yeah, this race was so interesting to see Max back in his villain era. I feel like he's been, like, pretty nice and pretty, like, calm over the last few years, because why wouldn't you be when you're just absolutely annihilating your competition? But we have now had 7 winners in 2024, which is wild.
Amazing.
The only person out of the big 4 teams that has not won is Max's teammate Checo. And
Correct.
if this gets to be a lot closer for the constructors, I think that that's going to like have further division. I'm a little bit, I don't know. I feel like Sergio, I just don't have faith that he's going to do well this weekend. And I feel like outside of like winning it or coming like top 5, it just kind of feels like he's done. Doesn't it kind of feel like he's done with this too a little bit?
No, I think he had a good race.
He did have a good race.
I think they brought the new floor out. I think he had a really solid race. Checo is somebody that should be able to finish top 6. And even if, especially with Max starting behind him, he's going to have potentially better of an opportunity to start in a better place. The other piece about this is, even if he mucks up qualifying, this is a track where you can, 1, overtake, and this is a track where, 2, we know Red Bull is going to set the car up to overtake, right? We know they're going to run a lower downforce rear wing. We know they're going to be focused on passing cars because Max already has to start P10. And in a way, I kind of think that helps Max going into the weekend, because you're starting on the back foot. You're starting from P11, P12, P13. What can you do to get back on the right foot rather than, thinking that you're going to start P1 and starting P4? Your whole strategy has to change. So I think going into qualifying, this team is really going to be focused on minimizing the points lost to Lando. And I think for Max, that means getting on the podium. On a track where aero efficiency is really, really important, Red Bull have an aero-efficient car. They're good through high-speed corners. Are they the McLaren? Potentially no. But I still think they're strong enough to be there or thereabouts.
All right, so we will obviously give you our nailed down final bets later this week after we see the cars on the track. But I wanted to kind of take a look at some different prop bets and really just the odds overall this week and kind of have you break down why we're seeing what we're seeing, right? So we've got Lando Norris right now plus 110 to win the race outright. Max Verstappen plus 300 and Oscar Piastri plus 480. Now, I understand the fast corners and I understand Max being at the top because this is a race he's won 3 times in a row. I also understand, based on current form, I'm searching for Sergio. Plus 4,300 is a lot. Oh, that's crazy. Here's the breakdown. Lewis is at plus 1,200, but then we've got Leclerc at plus 3,200. Is there that big of a gap in the Mercedes and the Ferrari, or is this track specific?
Great question. I think this is more just looking at form. I think if we look at form over the last probably 3 races, it just seems that the Mercedes is really taking a step forward. I mean, if we look at Silverstone, Lewis wins and finishes, second, 20 seconds ahead of Charles. So I think this is more baked into what driver is doing well, right? If we look at the last couple of races, Lewis has won. Lewis has been on the podium. He's obviously in a really good place. Within the team, he's driving well. So I think look at drivers on form, right? We think about this in other sports, right? That basketball player's hit 3 in a row, right? He's really doing well. Think about that with drivers. I think Lewis has been in really good form. I think Charles did well to finish P4 in Hungary. I think he made a little bit of a step forward. But we still don't necessarily know how that car is going to work in high and medium speed corners because we know that they were suffering with porpoising in kind of that post-IMLA update. So I think the post-IMLA update on the Ferrari in particular just means that there's still question marks about how this car is going to work in the high-speed corners, where it seems like the Mercedes development path of bringing little updates forward and really focusing on making sure those are bringing performance is really leading the car to being a better place. Now, I don't think they're Red Bull or McLaren level, but I think Mercedes are kind of finding themselves once again as the kind of third best team, able to compete for podiums, able to compete for wins when maybe others stumble or when they're, temperature, certain situations. And I also think let's look at track specific, right? This is a track where you're going to be on the full throttle a lot. This is going to be a track that's really a lot like Silverstone with not a lot of super heavy braking zones outside of, the Kimmel Straight and outside of kind of the back chicane. But a lot of the turns are going to be kind of high speed corners, really similar to Silverstone, where we know Lewis and Mercedes did well. So I think, we're looking at this from a lot of different ways. I think the bigger piece is Lewis has been stronger than Charles recently on form. We have questions about how the Ferrari is going to porpoise on high-speed corners, and it just seems like the Mercedes development path, with probably an update coming, is just going to put them in a better place going into Spa, going into the weekend, than Ferrari has.
So let me pivot off of that. With Leclerc currently at plus 3,200 on Wednesday before we see them on the tracks in Spa, would it be worth it to put a few dollars down if the car discrepancy isn't that like significant? Now, again, this is outright betting, so he probably, it's still a long hill to climb, but we're also talking about potential weird weather this weekend. So if you can get Leclerc or a Sainz or even a Perez and put a few dollars down, does that make sense at all for where we're at with this race? Or is that kind of fool's gold and not something we would look to do?
Save your money for Baku or Singapore. And the
Okay.
reason I say that is Baku and Singapore are street circuits where safety cars are going to be potentially higher. That means that the order could be mixed up if somebody takes a pit call. If somebody pits out a strategy and then there's a safety car and everyone else pits and they stay out, you could win, right? So we know Sergio has actually been pretty strong in Baku in the past. Charles, except for crashing that one time, is actually pretty strong there as well. So I think it's more about, if you're going to look to bet on some of these outside plus 3,200s, plus 4,200s, plus 4,300s, make it on tracks where either you can't overtake, Monaco, Hungary, or bet on tracks where there is historically been more chaos, right? And I look to that to say Vegas, right? We know that there's a street circuits, Singapore, Baku. Those are kind of have a little bit of a higher potential chance. The other thing I'll say about this track is Spa is pretty easy to overtake. So if the car behind is faster, that delta to overtake the car in front of you is lower. That's one of the things that Max really struggled with. Is obviously he had the faster car in Hungary than Lewis, but because that straight wasn't long enough, he never really had the ability to attack Lewis. So part of what's baked into these odds is predictions that faster cars will be able to or will not be able to overtake. And Spa is probably, Spa, Monza, those are tracks where it's a little bit easier to overtake.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to hold you to that. I want a very outside bet that I'm going to put like $20 on for Baku, and let's see if we can make some weird money on that. Can we click over to prop bets, Harrison?
Yes.
All right. So if we look at the prop bets going into Spa, the first one we see is Red Bull to have the fastest lap. And I think that has a lot to do with Max Verstappen and his grid penalty on Sunday.
Yeah, I agree. I think Max having the grid penalty potentially means that they're going to be trying some different strategies to try to get ahead of the cars in front of them, or to potentially get that fastest lap point. I think that potentially means that we could see Max starting on the hard tire, running long, and switching to the soft at the end. You could also see that happening with Sergio. He's really the tire whisperer, so he might be one to start on the hard and then switch to the soft later on. So it'll be interesting to see. I think Red Bull are one that have the highest probability of rolling the dice on the strategy side because they know they're starting from P10. So, I think they're willing to risk a little bit more to try to move with the grid. And that might mean that they're faster at different stages of the race than other teams are. And that's maybe where that, Red Bull to have fastest lap kind of comes into play.
Yeah, super interesting. All right, I know you've got other bets for us. What are we thinking for?
We're going 3 for 3 this weekend. We are bouncing back after Lance Stroll screwed us out of a 2 for 3 weekend and didn't give back our place. Not great, because we were going to be 2 for 3 next week, 2 for 3 last weekend. This weekend we're going 3 for 3. Got the feeling. Let's start it here. Mad Max finishes on the podium. I don't like him to win. I think the McLarens are out of touch. I do think that the Mercedes could be closer to Max over a full race stint than we want to admit. I also think this is a race where Max comes in under pressure. We've heard a lot about his radio calls. We've heard a lot about his talking to GP. I think Max needs to have a weekend where, excuse my language, he does some Max shit. I also think Max is mean on the first lap. I am really expecting Max on the first lap of Spa when everyone is crunched together to be able to gain 3 or 4 positions by the time we get to the Kimmel Straight. So one thing I want you guys to watch back home is watch how aggressive Max is going to be on lap 1, because I remember when he started, P11, P13 a couple years ago, and he was up to like P2 by the end of lap 2. So I expect him to be pretty aggressive. The other piece here is we know this car is going to be set up for overtaking. If he can survive the car in the wet, which, I don't think Red Bull have really had that many problems with getting tires switched on. And we also know that Max is a pretty dang good wet weather driver. So I expect him to be thereabouts in qualifying. And then in the race, I think they're going to set that car up for overtaking. They're also going to have the new engine, which means a little bit more horsepower. I also think that their energy deployment is pretty solid, so I expect Max to be there, kind of on the podium, standing next to the two McLarens. What can we talk about that intro? Like
Yeah,
that was great.
it was
Um,
great.
this is a motorsport special, so this is one of Meredith's call out favorite prop bets. Woohoo!
I'm
Uh,
leaning heavy into the prop bets because I like lots of chaos at all
you
times, and like
do.
having to watch several things and for it all to go right, and like then have my heart broken at times. Like, let's make it messy. After the messiest of the Hungarian Grand Prix, I want this to be even further messy. But what's this next bet? Tell me about it.
I like both McLarens to finish on the podium here. I think if we learned anything over the last 3 races, it's that McLaren has the fastest car. Now, we know that rain is going to be a little bit of an issue, so they're going to have to finish. Qualifying might be a little bit more of a struggle. But what I like here is, this isn't necessarily both of them to win. This isn't a 1-2. This isn't a 1. This could be a 1-3. This could be a 2-3. What I like about this is I think McLarens are going to push themselves to both finish in the points. I think Lando wants to prove that he's the faster McLaren, and I think that Piastri wants to show that he's figuring out how to get these tires to work over an entire stint length, because there were points of the race where he was really faster than Lando, up until kind of that last switch to the new tires. So, I expect Piastri to be really strong again this weekend. Do I expect him to win? No. Do I expect him to finish P3? Absolutely. I think this is a weekend where it's kind of a must-win for Lando. If he wants to be competitive and really turn this into a championship going into the summer break, he's got to beat Max here on home turf. If he doesn't beat Max, I still think they finish second and third. I like Mercedes, but I think if we've seen anything, I still think they're struggling a little bit in kind of the high-speed corners just to have the ultimate downforce that McLaren does, and just the aero efficiency that McLaren does. I kind of expect them to bring little wings here and be pretty darn quick down the Kimmel Straight. So I like both McLaren cars here. Talking about cars that are going to be fast down the straight, I like Nico here.
I'm sorry, he did not tell me what we were doing, and I could have bet you money, Harrison, that Nico Hulkenberg was going to reappear on this list.
I mean, I didn't call out Nico last race because I didn't feel like sometimes they struggle in tracks that don't have like a ton of high speed corners. Like slow speed Haas has just never been there. But this update looks fantastic. I think this update through high speed, medium speed, kind of like we saw them in a P6 in Silverstone. I expect Hulkenberg to be strong here. That Ferrari power unit is going to be strong over a long, long, long Spa lap. Hulkenberg knows this track well, and I think he's looking for a points finish after maybe struggling compared to himself in the last race in Hungary. So, yeah, I think Haas is a strong vehicle. We haven't seen a lot of mistakes on the pit stop side. We also have seen that their tire longevity has really improved compared to last year. So, Nico in the points, both McLarens on the podium.
So, this is Wednesday, and here are P1 picks bets so that you can win some money this weekend. We've got Max Verstappen Podium Finish minus 220 odds. We've got both McLarens to finish on the podium. That's minus 155 odds. And then finally, a P1 picks special. Nico Hulkenberg minus 180 points finish. We feel good about that. I don't know why. I just It's Nico Hulkenberg minus 180. Yeah, every time he's consistent, he's good, he doesn't cause problems, but for some reason it just like does not compute to me every time. I don't know. It's
They
weird.
have good competition. Racing Bulls will be fast, Alonso will be fast, but I think Haas is it's just a Haas track. A lot of high speed, medium speed corners, a lot of straights. Aero efficiency is really, really important here. Alpine will struggle. I kind of expect, um, yeah, I think Alpine will struggle. Sauber will struggle. Um, they should do better. I was talking to a little buddy about what's the best practice. Always watch free practice 2. About
Okay.
halfway through free practice 2, they're going to do their qualifying runs. Now, they're not going to always come out and say, hey, they're doing qualifying runs, but you'll see the teams bolt on the soft tire about halfway through the session. And that's probably a really good opportunity to look at who has qualifying pace. Especially if you see some outliers, right? I know that watching FP2 in Great Britain allowed me to see how strong Hulkenberg was. I know watching FP2 kind of glory runs, qualifying runs midway through the Miami session in FP2 really allowed us to know how strong the Alpines were going to be there. So if you guys are really looking for a little bit more betting insight outside of just P1 picks, I would recommend turning on free practice, putting it on at about the 25-minute mark, and then watching the soft tire runs just to get an idea for how teams are doing through Sector 1, Sector 2, and Sector 3, and how that ultimate lap time is coming together.
Great call out, Harrison. I love that. Let's do one more thing real quick and then we will let you guys go. I want to. Do you mind if we pull up the constructor standings as of today? And
Absolutely.
I think that that will be a great way to prepare for our last pre summer break race weekend. All right, here we go. So, Red Bull Racing is 389. We've got McLaren at 338, Ferrari at 322, Mercedes at 241, and then everyone else is like way back. Aston Martin with 69. Okay. So, all that being said, how close do you think this is coming back from summer break? How close
The
are we
Constructors'
thinking?
Championship, I mean, right now, if we look at the odds, McLaren is favored. So I think we already know that potentially the fight at the top is going to be very, very, very close. I think that Ferrari have fallen back kind of from the opportunity to win. I would generally say that, kind of has like betting on show right now. If we go back to um, Constructors' Championship, I mean, I would generally say that McLaren are the favorite. They have two drivers who are doing really well right now. They have a car that is arguably the fastest. And I think just that combination of a car that's probably a tenth to a tenth and a half ahead of Red Bull and a driver in Piastri, a second driver who's won a
Yeah.
race, who's finishing on the podium thereabouts fairly consistently. Now, we struggled a little bit in Miami with contact with signs, but I think Piastri is a much stronger driver. And when you're talking about who is really going to be able to bring in those points, not only do Red Bull no longer have the fastest car, but they no longer have the best driver pairing. So I think the constructors championship at this point is McLaren's to be won. And I really don't love this. I really love this minus 130 bet for McLaren because there is some value there. I know we talked a couple weeks ago about Piastri versus Sainz at minus 115. And now that he's won that race, that really does have a lot of insight as well.
Right. So I think that if at the end of the year we see Red Bull still in first place for the Constructors' Championship, I think it might be the most impressive thing Max Verstappen has done over the last few years. And we're talking about somebody who has won multiple championships, a ton of races. But this is like two versus one right now. And hopefully Sergio will get some things figured out. But if Max can pull this off, I think it is mighty impressive.
I don't think he'll do it, but yeah, it would be impressive. I think McLaren has got got the better drivers. They've got the faster car. They have more wind tunnel time. That's one thing that we don't talk about is Red Bull being in P1 last year means that they have limited development time and limited tokens to use in the wind tunnel compared to McLaren. It seems like they brought a pretty big upgrade in Hungary, and Max didn't like it. So their development path post Spain is really struggling, and I think that's really where you've got to start to look at betting as we look to the back half of the season. Is teams are going to start to stop making upgrades pretty soon. So the form that you see right now, especially when it comes to teams that are bringing upgrades to the track that are working. I'm looking at you, McLaren. I'm looking at you, Mercedes, versus Red Bull and Ferrari. That if we really look at a post-Imola in Spain world, have struggled.
I'm excited about this race for sure.
Should be fun.
All right, so this is what you are going to put money on this week. Max Verstappen podium finish. That's minus 220 odds. Bet 100, win 45. We've got both McLarens to finish on the podium. That's minus 155 odds. If you bet 100, you're going to win 64. And then finally, we are thinking that it's an oldie but a goodie for us. Nico Hulkenberg Points Finish, minus 180 odds. Bet 100, win $55. I love this for us. I love this for you. Make sure to get your bets in early. And we will talk to you guys again after free practice later in the week. Have a good one.